Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for making the time for yet another GLS Legal Operations Masterclass. Very excited about today's topic, which is identifying the full spectrum of legal resources available to a legal team and unpacking 6 super effective strategies that allow you to leverage those resources. I'm excited about this particular topic because if we were doing a full major in-house legal team turnaround project, helping that team identify the resources that they currently have to hand is probably the most important part of that project. And we're going to share with you today a lot of the key principles that are fundamental to enhancing the performance of a legal team. That is, making the most out of the resources that you've already got, something which your C function will be very pleased to see you do. So let me just introduce today's session with a little bit more colour. But before I do, just a couple of housekeeping tips. If you have questions, because we've got quite a number of people online today, if you have questions, can I just ask you to direct message those to me? And at the end of the session, we're going to leave a bit of time to run through those questions and I'll respond to those questions. Secondly, everybody is on mute. To make sure that there's no interference, because we are recording this session and we like to make these knowledge exchange sessions available for download. So that'll make sure the quality of the audio is a lot better. Okay, so with that, let me get on with the introduction to the session. So transitioning to the next slide, what we're going to do for starters is we're going to recap some of the fundamental principles associated with RPLV decision making. Now, RPLV decision-making is a decision-making matrix or framework reference that GLS has developed to help in-house leaders place all of their resourcing decisions into a strategic transformation context. That is, the daily resource decisions that you make, how can we ensure that they are actually positively aiding your transformation agenda? Okay, so we're going to recap on those principles because today is about leverage, which you see is one of the key parts of RPLV. In part B, what we're going to do is begin investigating the true extent of resources that are available to most legal teams. That's a really important area because the historic response from in-house teams in terms of resources is that they've got people and they've got a budget. And that's a very narrow or blinkered view as to the real reality out there. Part C, which is obviously what you've all dialed into here, is we're going to run through 6 very powerful resource leveraging strategies. And to make sure that the theory of those strategies becomes applied knowledge, we're going to slide into part 4, which is a case study about how to apply those principles in the realm of contracting, which is a core function of any legal team anywhere. And we can see by reference to an activity that you're all involved with, how powerful and easy it is for these strategies to actually be implemented. Part E, we're going to introduce a couple of additional resources that you might find valuable and that you'll find very easy to access. And then we're going to conclude with a couple of final thoughts and some homework that we're going to give you, should you be willing to take on some assignments that will benefit you. Together with a little bit of Q&A, we're going to look at the questions that were submitted during the course of the webinar. So let's get into part A. RPLV transformation decision making. Okay. The current operating reality for all legal teams out there, and let me know if you feel you're an exception, is that everybody is operating under a growing pressure cake scenario. Exponentially growing legal and compliance requirements are being experienced by all legal teams, which is manifesting itself into greater workloads. But certainly since 2008, and certainly in the context of COVID as we find it today, most legal teams have fewer resources than ever. So growing workload and fewer resources to actually meet that workload. The gap between what you need to do and what you've got to hand to get it done is actually growing. All of that challenge is occurring in the context of digitization, okay? Businesses and legal teams with inside businesses are now dealing with either the threat / opportunity of digitization, okay? how can we digitize our legal operations? And what this means really is that the business as usual approach that most in-house teams, or the old law approach as we like to call it, whereby you can't keep up with the requirements that the business is generating for your legal team because of resource deficits, right? It means that there needs to be a transformation in the way in which you're operating. Effectively, you've got to come up with new strategies to perform, the miracle of loaves and fishes, to achieve a leveraged productivity effect with the resources that you've got, okay? So what we've introduced is a decision-making framework that helps you turn the tide on a deficit between the work you need to do and the resources to hand. And that's RPLV-based transformation and decision-making. So your IHL team is obviously facing a new operating paradigm that it needs to slide into. That is that you consistently and daily achieve far more, right, for your business, and not just in terms of quantity, but also quality, but with less financial resource and human resource consumption. This is going to be a perpetual challenge for all in-house teams going forward. Now, what RPLV allows you to do is to better address and more sustainably address what's going to be a perennial challenge, okay? The workflows faced by an in-house team are not going to decrease. They're going to increase. We're operating in a more regulated environment, not less regulated. The businesses that we serve are trying new and different things to pull themselves out of or free from really difficult operating conditions. So the requirements that we need to support are going to be new, they're going to be more challenging, they can be more complex. So they're just the overall demand that's required of the in-house team to meet is going to grow. The strategic context, RPLV is going to give you a strategic context for your daily decision making, which is a very, very powerful concept. Most people, when they think of transformation, think of an intervention where you bring in a McKinsey or a Booz, and they're going to come in and they're going to deliver their PowerPoint presentations with a fancy solution, and the organization is going to implement it, and all of a sudden things are going to work. Well, 99 times out of 100, those kind of projects fail. What one needs is a slow and steady, real-time course correction of what you're doing so that over time, you're going to experience a full transformation. So to have a decision-making framework that allows your daily resourcing decisions to be placed into the strategic transformation context becomes a very powerful and easy to implement tool. What it allows you to do is to effectively, on a daily or multiple times per day, it allows you to establish some control over the transformation process. It allows you to establish control over how it is I can turn the tide on my resourcing deficit, okay? It guides you effectively to a more legal operations mindset. And the concept of legal operations is something which is really beginning to take root across the legal industry, and something we're pushing obviously very, very hard at GLS. And we'll come back to that during the course of this. So the final sort of point on this slide here is how the in-house teams respond to this perennial challenge as they enter this new operating paradigm is going to be profoundly influential on the overall shape of the global legal industry going forward. As you'd remember from Masterclass 1, over 60% of the turnover of the global legal industry for private practice is directed by the hands of people such as yourselves. Okay, 60% of the global turnover of private practice law firms is directed by in-house teams. So to think that you don't have a voice in terms of what's required of the industry would be incredibly naive. And our point at GLS is that it's time for the IHL community to start understanding the power of their voice. Now, RPLV is going to help you drive an optimally efficient transformation. That is, allow you to attend to the business as usual requirements of the business, but in so doing, adopting a decision-making framework that makes that a strategically important transformation project at the same time. Okay, so what is RPLV? RPLV decision-making effectively is based around ensuring that your use of the resources you have to hand reflect the priorities of your business and leverage the maximum productivity gains that are available from each resourcing assignment and bring about gains in terms of productivity that can be validated, okay? resourcing, prioritization, leverage, and validation. The transformation outcomes, just skipping ahead because this is a summary of what we introduced in our first masterclass. The transformation outcomes and the benefits of working with an RPLV, which we'll unpack in a little bit more detail, is effectively that it allows you to self-author your team's move to a more productive footing. Okay? It's non-disruptive in that the strategic import is applied into your environment as you address the business as usual requirements. And that's very powerful. It's not like I stop what I'm doing and start a new project. No, you focus on what the business requires, but you bring a strategic element to it. It's incremental, okay? It's not a big bang McKinsey project. It's something that is incrementally implemented into your ecosystem based around the actual real-time needs of the business. And critically, it's based around a pass and proceed. You don't do the next thing unless the current thing is proven to work, right? We have some inbuilt inefficiency avoidance strategies that are innate in terms of the application of RPLV, in that it makes you think about, is this the best possible resourcing decision that I can make here now? And it avoids missteps, okay? It focuses on validated outcomes. It helps you as an internal stakeholder inside of your business to establish credibility, to establish platform, so that when you are looking for support from the business, you've got a track record of success that the business will get behind and are more likely to follow. Effectively, RPLV, when consistently applies, helps you make the case for a fuller expression of the productivity contribution, the strategic contribution, the business enabling contribution that an in-house team can make and certainly at the moment must be making, given how difficult things are out there. So let's just look at each of the 4 elements of RPLV, which will prime us nicely for part B when we start examining the full spectrum of resources. So resources. Okay, the full spectrum of resources, what we're going to spend a bit of time is identifying all the classes of resources that are available to an in-house team. Okay, it's essential that you understand the full universe that's available. R, of course, is the vital collaborator of L, right? We're looking at leverage strategies today, but what are you going to leverage? You're going to leverage the resources that are available to you. We're also going to look at resource cultivation strategies, and effectively resourcing is, by looking at the categories and classes of resources, we can come up with more efficient strategies for leveraging. The achievable outcomes when you take this approach of examining the full spectrum of resources that are available to you is that very swiftly, each and every one of you are going to discover that, and this is good news, inside your legal team and inside your organization, you are going to have an abundance of latent capacity, okay? What this means is that just by adopting the RPLV process of thinking, framework for thinking, you are going to be able to increase productivity yields for your legal team without any costs, because you've got resources there. And if you're like 95% of the businesses or the legal teams we work with, those resources are not being fully utilized. Instantly, just by adopting a way of thinking, you are going to be able to exert greater control of your future. Okay? It's not like, oh, I need to hire more people, boost my headcount. Oh, I need to get more budget for external purchases. No, you're going to be able to address that perennial condition of resources being less than the workflow you require by an instant increase to your base load of resources. It's going to mean that you're going to be less intimidated by the challenges that you face. It's going to give you a clear case for action. And frankly, in most organizations that we work with, we think just by taking a more holistic approach to what resources you have available to you, you should be able to achieve up to a 30% productivity increase for your legal team without spending anything other than the time it takes to apply RPLV thinking. Big claims, we want you to test them. Golden rule, by identifying the resources available to you, you have a chance to optimize everything. Priorities. Okay. Given that no team out there has an infinite pool of resources, there is going to be competing or competition for the resources that you do have. So priority setting theory becomes very, very important to the way in which an in-house team acts. What it requires is effectively that you make the best use of the limited resources that you've got. It means that you actually have to become somewhat political, definitely strategic in terms of how you apply those resources. The questions that you need to ask is, what really matters to my business? What can I do that really moves the needle for the business? And what am I doing, or what can I do that allows me to demonstrate in a more tangible manner the value that I'm creating? And ideally, what can I be doing that creates recurring value scenarios for the business? Prioritization setting theory, when you apply it, helps you to start deploying resources in a more sustainable way, okay? Now, an important thing to note about prioritization context, and again, you can go back and look at webinar 1 where we really unpack this in a little bit more detail, or you can go onto our opinion channel and you can look at that seminal white paper we produced on this and then unpack it a little bit more. But what prioritization means is that you must have a very clear sense as to what your responsibilities, goals, and objectives are as a legal team. How can you prioritize unless you have an agreed mandate with your business in terms of what you're responsible for, what it is that you need to achieve? It's very difficult, therefore, to prioritize if you do not have a group legal policy. That is a document which very clearly sets out what the domain responsibility is for your legal team and what it is that the parameters from a risk and compliance point of view that you are trying to secure for your business, okay? If you don't know what the result is, what the prize is, how can you judge your performance against the attainment of those goals? If you are like 90% of all of the in-house legal teams that we deal with, you're probably not going to have a formally documented, comprehensive group legal policy. Now, in seminar 2, we spent a good deal of time talking about the importance of understanding what your domain authority is as an in-house legal team. Strongly encourage, if you didn't attend that session, to go and play back that session and to get your head around about the importance of policy, because absent that, right, it's going to, you're going to start well behind the starting line, okay? Prioritization, as I mentioned, can involve politics. Sometimes you might find yourself looking to deploy a single class of asset against a couple of need scenarios. If one scenario, whilst just as laden with risk to the business, allows you to report how well that you actually attained, what value you created for the business, whereas the other scenario does not, then obviously RPLV theory dictates that you go with what you can actually validate. Because what we need to do to drive greater in-house value recognition, right, internal client value, internal IHL value recognition, is that we need to start acting more like all the other business departments out there, which effectively is we've got to move more towards the language of business, which is really numbers-based. Can you demonstrate what you brought? Okay, we're going to cover that when we get to the V section a little bit more in another slide or two. So leverage. We've identified the resources. We understand the priorities in relation to which we want to apply those resources. Now, the next thing that we need to do, which is the main thrust of today's session, is that we need to actively consider appropriate leverage strategies. Okay? With every time we deploy resources, we need to say, how can this deployment be leveraged so that the maximum productivity yield is achieved for our organization? Now that means considering the leverage profile of each category of resource or the resource that you're actually looking to deploy. Preference as a general rule, not an absolute rule, should be given to a resourcing allocation that delivers the greatest leverage profile. Now, as an example, you could go and pay, insert name of law firm to review a contract, and they'll send you back a bill between $2,500 and $10,000. Or you could reach out into the GLS universe of Legal Operations Center tools and obtain a perfectly calibrated clause bank that gives you 75% of every single clause that you might ever need in any contract going forward, which could be maintained for you. Which resource deployment in that case of external spend is going to create the greatest productivity resonance to your organization? Obviously, a clause bank. Another example, get a firm to review it or get a firm to give you a checklist so your own people can review it, right? The point is that we need to have IHL teams actively take a pause point and say, all right, understand what the resource is, understand what the priority is, but where does the maximum productivity yield come from, right? And then you need to make every resourcing allocation count, whether it's time, whether it's effort, whether it's people, tools, experience, or advice. Every single category of resource deployment must be made to resonate in terms of maximum productivity. We're going to cover 6 powerful strategies in part C of this presentation. Okay, validation. Effectively, validation, or this move to, and look down the bottom there, to everyone that didn't quite realize they were on a journey, you've now officially arrived in the era of empirical data, where the value of the legal team absolutely categorically must be demonstrable and must be recurring. The move into performance metrics and data analytics inside the legal domain is something which is beginning to take root, and is providing a very powerful counterbalance to the intangible nature of the in-house lawyer role. Okay, what we've got to be able to do as an industry is to demonstrate the value that we bring to the business. So the idea is to increasingly move to a position where we can focus on the more recurring value scenarios and track the results that we secure. Now, the ability to track your performance can help influence, the decisions that you make. The example I gave you a few minutes ago, if one allocation is something that allow you to verify what's achieved, as opposed to something which is equally important but you can't verify it, then obviously, there's a strong case to go for what can be verified. By being able to validate the productivity yield, the value you generate for your business, you move away from being that intangible cost center characterization of an in-house legal team, which we've historically endured, and you're paving your way for more positive and deeper level transformation initiatives. The theory goes that if you can demonstrate success after success, success begins to attract success. Okay, and the importance of we've got our legal operation, ultimate guide to legal operations, coming out in the next fortnight. There's going to be a very detailed chapter there about performance analytics, and of course we covered this in more detail in session 1. But you really need to understand that as an in-house team, you've got to be able to demonstrate what it is that you've actually achieved, right? If you expect budget, you expect headcount, you expect recognition, you've got to move to the language of business, which unfortunately is numbers to the talking. Okay, so just quickly before we go into looking at the available spectrum of resources, what does adopting the RPLV decision-making framework, right, into your daily decision-making deliver for you? Well, very simply, in 5 quick points, it's a way of thinking. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything, right? It's, RPLV. You can write it down. You can download the slides. You can look at the white paper, read it. And to apply it doesn't cost you anything other than a few seconds of your time each time you make a decision. Second thing is that it's incremental, okay? By taking an RPLV approach to your daily decisions over time, right, you're going to cycle through all of the things that your legal team is required to do for the business, and you are going to have brought a transformation perspective to everything that you actually do in real time. And what that means is that you're setting the scene for real change, right? Not change which has been architected by an external consultant. And we've got a tremendous little case study we can share with you about how disastrous it can be to have a third party tell you what it is that you should be doing. But it's real change. And critically, it's self-authored change, right? Someone can tell you can change and you're not going to. A terrible example, but we all know someone, we all know people that continue to smoke, and you tell them whatever, all of the health risks, the social unpleasantries associated with this, etc. And unless they decide to change, it might as well be, water or a duck back. So self-authored change is really, really powerful. And then the Pied Piper effect, right? If you can show that you've achieved success with the resources that you've already got on your books, you've made it work harder, and you can start articulating the value it's generated to the business, your credibility as a business unit is going to grow massively. And more important than that, right, you're going to start creating a more empowered platform for you to project your influence onto the business, which is something that we absolutely and categorically need at these difficult times right now. more than ever before, the business community needs our in-house community to help mop up the disaster associated with the ongoing GCC, now re-aggravated by COVID, okay? People are going to be panicked, there's going to be knee-jerk reaction, people are going to get more litigious, okay? Our function needs to be accessible, it needs to be on point, and it needs to be operating from a platform where it's respected and valued. So RPLV is a very, very simple way to help you, right, without any kind of major intervention, bring a more strategic transformation framework to your decision making. Right, part B, the bit that you've all been waiting for, okay? We promised that there's a better view of the world than a legal team operating by reference to people and also budget. So let's investigate the fuller spectrum of legal resources. The default view is, when asked what resources that are available to a legal team, people will typically say, well, I've got a budget, I've got some human resources, headcount, maybe, noting that, in our estimate, over 95% of businesses do not have the luxury of having an embedded in-house team. Okay, think of that, and that's another problem that we need to fix, but more of that at a later date. And you might have access to, a couple of the usual suspects in terms of subscriptions, whether it's a PLC or Westlaw or the like. This, regrettably or positively, is a very dim view in terms of the assessment of resources that are available. And that view, to a not insignificant extent, explains the suboptimal performance that in-house teams are generally achieving. And if you look over to the graphic on the right, there's a ton of empirical data which sits behind what you see over there. The view is that they've got legal counsel money, which gets you so much time, and the number of people that you have and the skills they have, or the skills you can buy in with a limited number of money, represents the skills available to you. Now, in a typical in-house team, 70% of the overall resource allocation is doing work which is considered, grindy kind of work. Whereas really, if we want to start driving greater in-house value recognition, we need to be achieving at least 20% of our time in revenue or strategic-based assignments, and not less than 10% dealing with X factors. Now, COVID or Black Swan projects is a good example of X factors. Note there in that graph there, you can see that your legal support requirements and compliance requirements are growing exponentially, where in the northerly direction, where there's a southerly pressure on your available resources. Now, our point is this: there are far more legal resources available to you than meets the eye, right? A message which hopefully is reinforced by the graphic that we have there, okay? All in-house teams have far more resources than they actually recognize. People and budget are really the tip of the metaphorical iceberg, okay? But you've got to have the correct view. You need to have your in-house legal matrix moment. If you can remember that wonderful movie, The Matrix, when Keanu Reeves finally began to see all the digital bit streams for the first time, which gave him mastery of his domain and enhanced his already superpowers. Okay, let me just now add in a key to unlock your magic moment, your matrix moment. A resource, as defined by GLS, right? This is critical. It's anything that helps you get the job done. Right? It's not just people, it's not just budget, it's anything that can help you to get it done. Could be a case study, could be a checklist. Okay? So yes, resources are definitely people, no disputes around that. It's definitely budget, it's definitely PLC subscriptions, but it's also team training, it's automation, it's checklists, it's legal department policies, it's your time, it's data, it's other people's time, it's counterparties, it's all these other things here as well. Okay? Just pause on that for 5 seconds and have a look there. All of these resources are available to, and I think we've got something like 48 different classes of resources available there. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of discrete elements that could be useful to help you getting the job done. Okay? It's critical that the in-house team, the in-house community, start to better understand everything that's available to you. You need to identify your universal, you need to identify the resources that are available to you with the precision of the periodic chart, right? All of the known elements in our universe, okay? And you need to invest some time into this, right? People, budget, internships, case studies, journals, all of these things offer the ability, if used correctly, to help you get your job done, okay? But let me just stress again, a resource, this is the third time, is anything that's going to help your in-house team get the job done. That is the magic enabler in terms of our RPLV thinking, right? And it's critical that you identify as many resources that are available to you, most of which are actually free, most of which many of which other departments may have actually purchased for you. For example, using your intranet to communicate better with the internal client doesn't involve any additional expense. And it's critical that you identify the full resource spectrum, because that ultimately is going to drive your in-house transformation agenda. This is a sector defining slide. We've introduced the old law scenario, whereas what business community requires from us now is for the in-house community to become a new law legal team. Now, just look at the part on the right. It's not about how much you're getting done, it's what you're actually getting done. So if we can, whereas previously we're spending 70% of our time on grind, and the grind levels increase, a new law legal team is going to want to be able to spend not more than 25% of its legal team's capacity dealing with the grind, but achieving greater performance levels. This means that all of a sudden we've got up to 50% of our time available for revenue strategic projects, new markets, new projects, new lines of working capital, etc. These are the things that the business needs us to be focusing on, and even greater bandwidth, right, in the uncertain world that we actually live in today, to deal with X factor. But at the top of the conversation, we're talking about this concept of finite resources. One thing's for sure, the category of resource called external budget or headcount are probably the least likely categories of resources where your business is going to say, yeah, please go ahead, increase as much as you like. What it means is we need to reconfigure those finite resource categories do and what they interact with. We need to combine them with new capacity solutions, new productivity tools, new forms of legal technology. We need to empower them through performance-based validation, knowledge tools, and the like to achieve this transformation, okay? So just to recap, we've got the old law team, very narrow view of resources. We need to take those finite resources and combine them in different ways with newly identified categories of resources, most of which already exist inside some organizations but have been overlooked. That's the latent capacity that we were talking about as residing inside most legal teams, okay? You're not going to get more budget and time, so we've got to change up what we achieve with that by gaining access to new categories of resources, because this is what's going to drive the transformation of your old law legal team into a new law legal team. We have to make every one of those resource categories count. Okay. Now, I appreciate that we've gone through the approach to identify the broader spectrum of legal resources at pace. We're going to slow it down a little bit in part C and help you manage it in terms of some basic ways of sort of thinking about that spectrum of resources by covering some leverage specific strategies. What we're going to do is we're going to introduce 6 powerful resource leveraging strategies. First is resource identification, which we've just done. Okay? We've given you the powerful premise, right, that helps you change your perspective. Resources is not people and money or PLC subscriptions. Resources is anything that allows you to get your job done. And that's why we gave you that nice little cartoon there about reality being so complex that equally valid observations from different perspectives can appear contradictory, okay? We are the team on the left where we're going to see 4, not 3. Okay. Then we're going to give you a way of managing that resource spectrum more efficiently. We're going to break them down into some logical categories, and then we're going to transition nicely into some cultivation strategies, which can be category sensitive. And then we're going to talk about a strategy around resource application, resource combination, and resource validation, which is a more embedded or applied application of RPLV principles, which we've introduced, and hence spending a bit of time recapping on that. Okay, so strategy number 1. First thing that we want you to do, right, is, and we mean this, we want you to take a blank piece of paper, today, after the session, certainly the weekend that's coming, and identify all the resources that are available. As a starting point, use the list in this presentation, or give us a call, arrange a consultation, we'll give you a fuller list, right? And then survey your own organization and just note down, without any kind of censoring, what you think is available to you that could help you get the job done. Don't restrict yourself. Consider involving your team. The team has, very, very great ideas. In almost all cases, involving your team and aggregating the contribution is a very powerful strategy. Your team operate at different levels in the organization. They cover different parts of the organization. They might be based in different geographies. They'll have a legitimate perspective around what could help them get it done. Okay? If it's useful, note it down, put everything on the table, and let the miracle of loaves and fishes literally unfurl before you. Okay? It doesn't matter whether all of your resources or potential resources appear in an uncoordinated fashion, because strategy 2 is going to allow you to bring order to it. Okay? What we want to do in strategy 2 is to help you categorize your resources into a limited number of categories that will in turn feed nicely into a leveraged resource category cultivation strategy. Okay? So what we want you to do is to recognize and devise resource categories that are specific to your organization, and populate the universe of resources that you and your team identified into each category. What this is going to allow you to do is to come up with a very efficient way of resource planning, because each category of resources can have a slightly nuanced cultivation or leverage strategy. And if you look at the image that we've used on this slide there, that's the balanced portfolio. Okay, like the investment principle that you should have a balanced portfolio of higher risk stocks, low risk, investment categories, etc. It's exactly the same with your legal resource strategy. You need to be working across that portfolio and have balance your efforts in terms of cultivating across each of those categories. Let me add a little bit more color into this. Okay? We have identified 5 different types of resource categories that we use on our in-house transformation projects. Okay? The first one, and we're sort of sticking with the analogy of the balanced investment portfolio, what we call liquid assets. These are finite resource categories where you either use them or lose them. That's your time, that's your budget. If you get one corporate retreat per year, or as you may have done pre-COVID, you either use that opportunity to help you get your job done better, or you don't. You've got fixed assets in abundance. Most of you aren't looking at your document management systems or email systems, or in some cases CRM systems, which are typically centrally allocated or supplied services as assets that can be leveraged. Okay? They are a distinct category of resources that are available to a legal team. You've got longer term assets. These are classes of resources that take a longer term to develop. And that could be goodwill, stakeholder relationships, the investment you make into low-tech projects. So for example, if you want an automated clause bank, over time you need to sort of build up with, well, this is how we like that clause to look, this is how we like this clause to look, etc., and aggregate those clauses. It takes time. Then you've got self-made commodities. We like this category a lot. Okay? These are things that you can make yourself, such as checklists, internal training. Then you have what you are currently experiencing. Okay? you are getting absolute industry-leading insight in terms of legal operations and legal team productivity by dialing into this webinar. Right? I don't wish to sound immodest, but these principles actually work and we're sharing them with you. But many organizations have different type of knowledge that they share, whether it be your law firm newsletters, whether it be white papers coming out of big four consultancies or CLOC out of the US. What you do have an opportunity to do is to aggregate this seemingly unlimited diaspora of information, process it, delegate responsibility to harvesting that data amongst your team. So there are 5 categories where you can think about populating all the resources you identified. What that might look like, right, or what that empowers you to do rather, is to build a limited number of resource category cultivation strategies. So instead of having 50 different resources as I had on my slide 5 slides back, you can come up with 5 broad brush resource cultivation strategies to allow you to maximize leverage you get from each category. So if you look at the liquid category, for example, okay, now if you've got external budget, right, now sometimes there is a building on fire inside your organization and you just need to put